Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the TTWYK podcast. Tell them what you know. My name's Stefan, I'm your host. And the reason I started this podcast is I speak to so many founders, CEOs, business owners, MDs who've got amazing businesses, who've got great stories to tell, got all kinds of experiences, successes, failures, cock-ups, things that went brilliantly, things that bombed, and all those experiences have taught them things and have gotten to where they are today. Now, those lessons and stories are no good being stuck in their head. It's great to get them out and share them with the world because other people could be informed by them, entertained by them, educated by them. It could be situations where they go, I'm in that situation now. That's some great advice on how I can apply that into what I'm doing in my business right now. So I know my very first guest well, Ollie Crudgington. Ollie, it's great to see you here. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on to the first episode. It'd be great for people who don't know who you are, just get a bit of background to who you are, what you do, what your business is all about, and how you help people.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I'm very excited to be the first podcast in this series. It'll be good. Let's see where it goes. So I think we said off camera that I'm probably definitely the first and only person that you're going to speak to who started life out as an ostrich farmer. But I eventually got into property, having done various other things first, but I eventually got into property, and I was an estate agent for just over 20 years, learned everything about the property industry that I felt that I needed to know, went on from there to be a land buyer. And when I was acting as a land buyer, I was buying big schemes and helping multimillionaires buy big schemes and trying to get the property for the best price possible. And while I was doing that, I thought, nobody does this for buyers. You've got estate agents who represent sellers and try and get as much money for the house that they already own as possible, but nobody acts for the buyers in making sure that they don't overspend or holding their hand through the murky waters of purchasing properties. So that's why I set up Barton to help buyers and hold their hand throughout the process, give them a bit of confidence, make sure they're not overpaying, and hopefully save them a bit of money where necessary.
So just going back a stage, just thinking about how you decided to start Barton Hawk. Did you always think when you were younger that you wanted to be an entrepreneur, wanted to own your own business? Or is this something that has evolved? Do you think people are born into this with this desire to lead from the front and be their own and command of their own life? Or do you think it's something that evolves, or is it bred into you from your parents? Where do you think it comes from?
I wanted to be a stuntman.
Exactly.
and I went to be a stuntman. I was in a few movies and I used to do a bit of stunt work, and my father was an estate agent and my grandfather was an estate agent, and it was always seen that I'd go into the property industry, and I thought, I'll show you. And I went off, tried to be a stuntman, and as I said, did a couple of movies, traveled a bit. One thing led to the next. I went back then, it's different, but to be on the stunt register for equity, you had to have 5 disciplines that you were classed as an expert in. And you use the term very loosely of expert. But one of the things to do that is you have to ride or race something. And I raced motorbikes. And in order to do that, I had to get a bit of sponsorship from a motorcycle dealership, which I did, and ended up working within that motorcycle industry, bikes. And I thought, well, if I'm going to sell anything, I might as well sell houses. And then I went to work for one of London's leading estate agents and quickly rose through the ranks there. So it was my destiny, I guess.
Did you always think you wanted to have a business though? Or was that just something that has evolved when you saw an opportunity?
No, that's a really good question. I definitely knew I always wanted to have my own business. I went to a really good school and I was always in the half of the class that made the top half possible. So all my peers and some of my greatest friends that I'm still very good friends with today, including my children's godfather, or one of my children's godfathers, super intelligent, all got straight A's and things like that. And I was definitely not in that. So I always knew, I'm very competitive, and I always knew from an early stage that I'm not going to be able to compete with these lawyers, doctors, head teachers, air flight traffic controllers, designers. I'm not going to be able to compete with those guys. So if I'm going to compete with them, keep up with the Joneses, I'm going to need to own my own business. So that's where I am today.
And did you think it would be in the estate agent world because of your family heritage and that, or did you just sort of fall into that evolved naturally?
I think that evolved naturally. I think that ending up working in property, I absolutely loved it. And I can very much see the matrix of property now. You know, I can understand a lot of scenarios. So I think it's quite organic that I've moved into helping buyers. I love speaking with people. I love problem solving. So I think that any entrepreneur part of them certainly needs to be able to solve problems. Otherwise, there's no business to have. I'm quite a strategic thinker in that sense. And I think that lends itself very nicely to owning and running a business.
When you were working for other people in your career, did you look at those guys and think, yeah, I want some of this? Did you feel that at an early age, or do you think that was just something that came along later down the line?
That is a really good question. I work for some great people that I have loads of respect for, and sometimes in places where I didn't think I'd find it as well. I had a job at an estate agency in Watford, and I wasn't expecting to like it there at all. It was a case of necessity at the time. It was COVID times. And I was just blown away with, I'll say it, I don't mind saying the company. They don't actually exist anymore. They've been bought out by a bigger firm. But the company name was Imagine. I wasn't expecting to be impressed by them at all. The owner was a really good chap. And one of his directors, who I'm still friends with this today, I learned a lot from. But he kind of confirmed to me in many ways that kind of land buying and land agency wasn't for me. I just didn't have the flair and excitement for it. And that kind of pushed me into what I'm doing today. As far as aspiring and looking up to people, it wasn't really people that I worked for. It was family, really. My dad, my aunts, uncles, particularly one uncle. The ostrich farm that I spoke about at the beginning, as funny a start as that was, it's absolutely genuine. I started working for my uncle, who had an ostrich farm at the time. And the reason he had an ostrich farm when he started sort of 25 years ago was because this is when the beef scare was about, BSE beef scare was around. And there was a thought process at the time that, you know, we weren't going to be eating cow meat anymore. It was all going to switch to ostriches if they couldn't solve the problem. So he took a punt and started an ostrich farming that it could be the next big thing. It wasn't, but that was an uncle that I worked for. And that's kind of where I got my work ethic from as well. Just seeing him getting up, rain, shine, snow every morning, making sure that the animals were fed 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You know, it doesn't matter if it's Christmas Day, animals still need to be fed and looked after. And so I had a really good work ethic from very early on. And I think that you can become very successful in anything if you get your head down and just work.
I think I've never worked on a farm. I had relatives who had a farm up north, but it does give you an absolute respect for people who in the farming industry. It's a brutal world, isn't it? There's
It
no
certainly is,
respite in that industry, is there? It's like you
No,
say, any time of year, you know, you don't say, I'm not going to feed the animals because it's Christmas Day, you know, that they can fend for themselves. Doesn't work like that, does it?
no, absolutely. It's not. It's, and it was tough. And, you know, I remember being out there particularly we had to put up some weatherboarding on the end of a barn. And it was just hailing with snow, and we had to get it done. And I still think of that to this day, that, you know, no matter how hard work gets, I'm not at the top of a scaffolding with sleet and snow being blown in my face, hitting weatherboard. This is Steph. This was pre-health and safety. You know, this was my uncle's farm. You know, I just had to hold on tight. There was no harnesses or protective wear or anything like that. If I fell off that scaffolding, I was a goner. So, you know, I anchor back to that a lot. You know, if I'm having a bad day at work in this comfortable office that I sit in, I work in a very nice place in St Albans. It's very comfortable. I have people bring me cups of tea and food throughout the day while I get my head down and work. And you think that, you know, I haven't got it tough.
That raised an interesting point there, because I think we're in an age, and I do worry about young people when they see this perception online and social media of, you know, everyone's got a Lamborghini and everyone's, you know, having an amazing life in the sunshine and it's all easy. You know, in 5 minutes, you share some videos, next you know, you're a millionaire.
Yeah.
And, you know, that phrase, you can't have a great character and an easy life. You know,
Yeah.
when you go through hard times and you experience hard work and challenging, whatever it is in your life, could be health, it could be business, finances, family, friends, anything, all those challenges and experiences make you what you are today. And, you know, I've done similar things that these days, health and safety will probably shut us down, you know, climbing up buildings to fix stuff and, you know, getting on roofs and all kinds of ridiculous stuff that really shouldn't have done. And luckily it was all fine, but it all just, you know, breeds character and it breeds that work ethic that I think is so valuable to draw on. Firstly, to make you feel lucky later on. You say, look, you're sitting in a lovely environment there. It's a great place to work from, but you've done stuff that was freezing cold, bloody hard work, a little bit dangerous, and probably didn't pay you amazingly well, but you did the work, didn't you? And that's good for your character, I think.
I think that's true. And I think you're right of young people of today. But I think older people, so I'm in my late 40s, and I think people of my generation are guilty of that as well when it comes to businesses. I think that people shout a lot about their successes, but shy away from their failures. I've definitely had some failures. I ran an estate agency for 11 years and it was a great business and everybody had a fantastic experience, but it was worth nothing when I was done with it.
Yeah.
It was a lifestyle business that, gave us a healthy wage when we were doing it and gave some people some fantastic experiences. But as far as the success of a business is concerned, it wasn't great. And I think that a lot of people are embarrassed and shy away from their failures. I mean, this reiteration of Barton Hook, which is now looking to be somewhat successful and looks like it could be incredibly successful, fingers crossed. But this is not the first attempt. I've had 2 or 3 attempts at this before, which I didn't really put what it needed into it. And I expected it to grow off of its own genius ideas. Can't do that. You've got to get your head down and you've got to get your head down and do the work.
I'm quite a big fan of Jimmy Carr, and I saw him talking on a podcast. It might have been Diary of a CEO, and he said, he gave instances like, for example, Michael Jordan without work ethic would just be another Sunday League basketball player who was pretty good, but you've got to put the work in unless you're an absolute genius. Everyone I know who's been successful has done the damn work. You get momentum, don't you? Depends on your ambition. People who want to get to, will never want to stop growing. Got to continually build a team, continually put the effort in, continually evolve. Some people in a lifestyle business and get to a level they're comfortable with, and they've got a nice team and they can manage themselves. And I'm going to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. But to get to that level, I don't think, even with the leverage of technology, advancements in AI, and all the tools we've got, you've still got to have the conversations. You've still got to do the work. You've still got to be thinking and working smarter and evolving. Where you are with Barton Hawk, as you said, hasn't just been an idea you thought of a few weeks ago. Give it a go. Next, it's taking off. This stuff is a continual evolution, isn't it?
It is. And I had to have the failures in order for me to have the ideas that are working now to work. By the way, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Carr as well. I've been fortunate enough to meet him, and he's a lovely guy in person as well. Very genuine. And I agree with everything that you've said. The last place of work that I had before I was busy enough to set up and do my own thing, I hated. I absolutely hated it. And the reason I know that I hated it and I knew it wasn't for me is because I really like the guy I work for. I'm still friends with him to this day, and we still try and do the deals. We still try and help him out. We still communicate regularly. Really lovely guy. I really liked him, but I hated doing it. But I had to go through that, to get the ideas of how to form the standard operating procedures within Barton Hawk so that it works, so that it has value, so it's got asset, and B, to scare me into, if this doesn't work, I'll be back doing something like that again. And that is a motivation in itself. Let's not forget my wife and 3 children that I've got to provide for. And, if it wasn't for my wife, who is also providing, we are equal income earners, equal child caregivers in our household, I wouldn't be able to do this, either. And I think that is a really important thing to remember, and certainly something that I respect, is that it's interesting what you were saying earlier on about a hard life builds character. I haven't had a hard life. I've had hard jobs, but I haven't had a hard life. I've had everything handed to me on a plate. I had an idyllic childhood. My parents are middle class and, perfect childhood, supported me both emotionally, financially. I never had to worry that I didn't have a roof over my head. I always had a full belly. I had a car from a young age. I was able to travel. So I'm very fortunate in that sense, in that getting to where I've got to is largely because I've had a lot of my life handed to me on a plate, and it's important to respect that. I've actually got a friend at the moment who's not in a situation like that, who's just got a job that I've helped to get a job for, and she's in a much tougher state. And I've got so much respect for people like that, that can climb the way up the greasy pole of employment when it's not been as easy, certainly, as I've had it.
I mean, I can relate to that. I've had a great life as well. I've had a fantastic childhood and was very lucky, very privileged. My dad was a self-made man, and it's funny going back to what we're saying about hardship, where my dad had a phrase he always used to use called clogs to ogs, which was starting with nothing, having something, and then going back to having nothing at all.
Yeah.
And that was what drove him. That fear of having nothing and feeling and tasting it all, having it all, and having the success and all the material stuff and the freedoms that gives you and the luxuries of choice that it gives you, to then losing that and going back to going, bugger, I've got to get a job, and then try and start all again. And it's just finding the things that drive you, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting dynamic. My grandfather was a self-made millionaire, and he came from a 1-bedroom council flat and built a very successful chain of estate agencies, funny enough. Not that I ever worked with them or played off the back of that. But his worst case scenario was that he'd go back to the one-bedroom council flat, which is where he began. So he could take those gambles because his worst case scenario. Now, if I ended up with my 3 children in a one-bedroom flat, psychologically, it could break me, and certainly would break my wife, and certainly would break my wife and I.
Mm.
So there is always that pressure of having to provide and maintain the standard that you're used to and go up and not drop below expectation. So yeah, that's a big pressure in itself. And, as I say, I've had a very privileged upbringing and privileged life to this state, and I realize how lucky I am, but that doesn't make it easy.
I think the point I was making was you didn't get to choose where you were born, what you were born
Yeah.
into, the life that your parents gave you. We were both fortunate to have good upbringings. A lot of other kids don't. The important part, though, is appreciating that, but then saying, what am I going to do with my life? Am I going to waste it, or am I going to do something of value to it? Now, ultimately, that means different things for many people. It can mean, look, I want to be a bus driver. I'm not ambitious. I just want to care for my
Yeah.
family, walk my dog, have a pint on a Friday night and go home and happy days. Other people want to say, I want to build a multinational billion-dollar company. And it's just finding that happy medium that works for you. And one thing I've learned, because I worked in my family business for many years, and we weren't a massive business, but we were a decent size, very profitable, very successful business in the print industry, which is sadly not what it is anymore.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
we shut that. I always thought I'd be in that business my whole life, my whole career. I loved it from, I used to go in at school and at college, and I didn't intend to go straight into it, but I worked in 2 other companies and traveled in between and ended up working there and taking the business over in time. But I always just had that drive to try and be the best I could be. And that doesn't mean the same to me now as it did back then. My values have changed in my life now. My kids have grown up. I've got 2 younger stepchildren, but I'm at the stage of life where I want to find some balance. And I'm still happy
Yeah.
with that. I don't necessarily want a team of 100 people. I'm happy talking to people like you, working with a small number of clients, adding value, working together, collaborating, having some fun, making some money for everyone. Of course, you're still going to be profitable, but the drive to grow a physical location business, the world's changed so much. We had one stage 3 factories and 60, 70 people and multi-million pounds investments in print equipment and the plant and all the rest of it. And we loved it. My dad and I, we loved it. We built a great business there. And it saddens me, and it always will do, that we haven't got that anymore, but things change. And I think the lesson I learned from that is you have to evolve. And
Yes.
that leads me on to a question that for me, that the most important trait as an entrepreneur is resilience and tenacity, to keep going no matter what those challenges are. So if you've built that resilience, and hardship doesn't have to mean you are, begging on the street. It could be health, it could be relationships, friendships, family, financial. There's all kinds of things, challenges that you learn from, that can give you resilience. It can just be your inbuilt determination. But what do you think it comes down to be successful, have that drive? Because when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a business owner, there's always someone who wants a piece of you. There's always someone who wants your attention, or money primarily, or decisions, or all the challenges end up at your door, no matter what they are. And that
Yeah.
takes a certain type of person. Lots of people will go, sod that, I'm just going to get a job at the end of the month and let someone else worry about it. What do you think the traits are you have to have to take that on the chin and keep, all the good stuff's great, but the bad stuff that you still have to deal with, and you're a relatively young business, I'm sure there'll still be future challenges to come. You've got to be tougher to face those. What do you think are the most important traits are to enable you to deal with it?
I think the first thing is to find your place. It was very clear that in the previous role that I was in land buying and land management wasn't for me. And had I have started a business in that, I would just be miserable at business every day. Therefore, everything that I would face would be a challenge. Now I do something I absolutely love, and I'm excited to go to work every day, and I'm very lucky to work in a very nice place, and I've got a very cool team behind me. And I genuinely look forward to going to work. And I don't really see it as work. I see it, it's such a cliche to say, but if you, I can't remember who said it. Was it Churchill that said, if you find a job, or it was either Churchill or John Lennon. I can't remember which one of the two it was, but it was, if you find a job that you love, then you'll never have to go to work again. So that's where I am. So I think that mentally being in a place to deal with those challenges is the most important thing, because somebody coming from money for you to pay for advertising for a business that you love is much easier to part with than parting with that money for something that you're not that passionate about in the first place, but know it's the right thing to do mechanically.
I get that. I get that. I've met people before who said to me, I've got a business that does X, Y, Z. I actually hate it, but I've got school fees to pay, bills to pay, a world, that's expensive. So I do it anyway. But
Mm.
you look at them and they look a little bit dead behind the eyes. What's your perspective on that? Because some people, we've got to earn money, right? Whatever your level of expectation or goal or ambition is, we all need some money to survive. I don't know if I could run a business now that I really hated, really didn't enjoy, but it paid the bills. I think life's too short for that. What do you think?
I think there's a balance there, isn't there? I think that if you're in a job that you hate, and if you run a business that you hate, and the money that you are earning, you're finding it difficult to survive on, you're in a really deeply, deeply unhappy place. If you are in a business that you absolutely love doing, you've got more money you can spend, then that's completely the other end of the spectrum. But there's a balance in the middle of that, isn't there? Everybody needs a certain level of income in order to survive. And it's finding that balance of getting the right amount of money in, but not stressing yourself to the point where you hate going to work. And I know that there are loads of bankers and lawyers and things like that that are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year that hate going to work and can handle it because they know that they only need to be there for a finite amount of time. If you're in that situation where you can say, well, I'm earning £500,000 a year, but I hate doing what I'm doing, but as long as I can last for 5 years, that puts me enough money away in order for me to live the life that I want to live for the rest of my life, then you're in a good
Yeah.
place. So I think it's a balance. I think a lot of people say, oh, it's not all about the money. Well, that's easy to say if you've got enough money to survive on. If you can't afford to feed yourself and or your family, it doesn't matter how much you love your job, you're going to have a stressful time about it. I think I read a statistic somewhere, and this was a few years ago, so just accordingly, but I think it was something like the people that, on average, the people that earn 35 grand a year are the happiest. Because at 35 grand a year, the likelihood of you taking on the stresses of a business is much lower, but it's enough to live on. So that's a benchmark. As soon as you earn more than 35 grand a year, yeah, it's great to have more money, but that comes with more responsibility and more stresses. And so that, I don't know what that figure is today. It might be £50,000 today. But the point is that I don't think it's as black as white as find something that you love or earn a certain amount of money. It's got to be balanced. As far as a business is concerned, that stress of not just earning enough money for you, but making sure that you can pay everybody that's involved in the business consistently, not just this month, but no, you've got the money coming in next month and the month after that, and going forwards, whilst at the same time bringing in enough money to expand the business to a stage that you want to get to.
So just going back a stage for you then, Ollie, I think there's lots of people who are watching this who may have a business already. There's also been, there's people out there who want to start a business and they've got a vague idea. Take me back to sort of the precursor before Barton actually landed, actually started. What was that process like? How long did it take? Where did the idea come from? And from having the idea to actually saying, ideas are great, but they mean nothing without actually taking action. What did that process look like from concept to initiation and then, progress?
Well, I think the first few iterations of what I did, marketing is a real black spot as far as my knowledge is concerned. And understanding how few people will know about your business, even though you think you're shouting it from the rafters, how few people actually see you, be it on social media, whether you've got paid adverts. I think I remember going onto Facebook ads and paying a few £100 that would guarantee me 5,000 views or something like that. And you think, blimey, 5,000 views, I won't know what to do with myself. 4,850 of those are going to be knocking down my door. And you realize that 5,000 views is nothing, That's 5,000 times that you come up inside from someone's feed that maybe somebody sees you for half a second, decide that they don't want to speak to you and then move on. And so the volume of attention that you need in order to convert that into revenue, I was just so naive about that. Because I had some early successes with just a few recommendations, I thought to myself, blimey, if Barton is kicking off this well just by friends and family recommending me to, now and then, And at that time, it was bringing in a bit of pocket money for me on top of the job that I was doing. It was handy that the job that I was doing was in line with Barton Hawk as well. That, it should be easy just to flick on a switch of marketing and all of a sudden, I don't have more money I can spend. How wrong I was. It was really bizarre, actually, because when you're in that world, you start thinking, well, I've had a really good idea here. I don't want to shout about it too much because other people might get the idea as well and go into competition with me. So, I better tread carefully. And you realize that, first of all, nobody's seeing you anyway. And even if they did, great if somebody else thinks it's a good idea and they're going to go into competition with you, it kind of boosts the idea of the industry, especially if you're breaking into a new concept. But that was my failures. That was the start as far as the concept is concerned, is that, I'll start this and it will go off on a steady trajectory, and I'll get more and more clients, and I'll get richer and richer and richer and richer. And you realize you get to about here and then it flatlines and then it nosedives and you think, okay, fine. I need to reframe this. I need to think about how I'm going to market it. Some fantastic books that I read. Alex Hormozi's 100 Million Leads. Dan Priestley has got 24 assets oversubscribed, are things that really, really resonated with me. And when I say I read them, I don't mean I read them and put them on the shelf. I read them and reread them and reread them and reread them, as well as a whole host of other books.
Yeah. So talking to Daniel, there's something that really resonated with me that he said once upon a time that I saw him live. I think he said this, and it's like that trade secrets thing, that your intellectual property, the stuff about how you deliver your products and service. Lots of people kind of want to, ring fence that and keep it to themselves. They don't want their competition knowing about it. And he said something along the lines of, if your IP is on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 10, but the content you share, whether it's LinkedIn posts, videos, social, any social media posts, brochures, leaflets, flyers, if they're only a 5, people will think your skill level and knowledge level is a 5.
Yeah.
What is the point? If your competitors really want to find out about you, they'll find out about you. They'll headhunt your people. They'll pretend to be clients. There's ways around it. That people look these things up. And for most, maybe there's some industries that doesn't apply to, but for the vast majority of people, if you share your best knowledge and your best skills and experiences and lessons, people then perceive you on that 10 level rather than the 5. And
yes,
it's a weird concept, I think, for many people to get their head around, that if I give this away for free, everyone's going to nick it. And I guess the same Barton Hawk, in theory, I could set a business up doing that, but I haven't got anywhere near the knowledge, the expertise, the experience, the contacts, the wherewithal to how to do that. And I think, is that something that came easy to you to go, actually, if I share these ideas, these strategies, this experience, this will actually elevate me rather than keeping a little bit back? I don't want to, tell people everything. I'll do it themselves.
I definitely think that what I read from Dan Priestley and Alex Hormozi gave me the confidence to give that stuff away. Alex Hormozi uses a phrase, "I don't do drugs, I am drugs." Give information away so that people get used to using your product. It's the whole thing with Microsoft Word and Excel, isn't it? They gave it away free so many years that so many businesses were so reliant on using Word and Microsoft Office and Excel and things like that became the go-to. That's what every business established themselves on as far as their internal systems. So when Microsoft turned it on and said, well, we're going to start charging for this now, everyone was like, well, I've got nowhere else to go so I've got to use this. And it's just that getting comfortable with the product and continuing using it. What you said about giving information away, I think that, what you said about you could try and set up Barton Hawk, but you don't have the knowledge and experience. I don't think that that's enough, having the knowledge and experience. I think that the barriers of entry and being able to, it's not just having the idea, having the experience and having the knowledge and the contacts, as you quite rightly say. That is obviously a huge part of it. But it's being able to survive for long enough for those great ideas, experience and contacts to take hold. When I was very young, I'm not going to say her name because she is a celebrity and it's not something I'm particularly proud of. But I had a girlfriend who eventually became a model, and she wasn't amazing. But what she was is somebody who had very wealthy parents. And so she was able just to audition for like 5 years, maybe not even that long, 3 years. But she was able to audition and go out to every audition for 3 years without getting paid for 3 years. And it's just eventually doing that for long enough. Eventually she got a bite, right? And then she was able to go on and be a model. There are thousands, if not millions, of beautiful young women out there that want to be models. But who can afford to survive for 3 years just going to auditions, waiting to get a bite? And I think that that's not just true of that industry. I speak about that industry. My brother's an actor, so he goes through that as well. It's just surviving for long enough until you get picked up. But it's the same thing in business as well. I think that we've got a brilliant concept. We've got a proven results, and we've got, check out our Google reviews. We've got 100% 5-star Google reviews. But longevity in the marketplace is so key to be taken seriously in order for it to take off, that surviving for that amount of time, even if you have got a brilliant idea and the connections and a bit of money behind you and the grit to do it, and you love doing it, that's still not the whole story. You've got to be able to survive and feed yourselves and a family whilst you do all that. It's tough. That's a huge barrier of entry in any business.
Agreed. And that's an interesting point, because it isn't always the best product or service that wins. It's the people who, the tenacity and the longevity to keep pushing it and keep selling it, and also to get known, to become, to build an audience. That's the value of building both personal brands and business brands these days. And doing what we're doing here is talking about it and getting people to hear what we say, and trying to be everywhere within reason. You haven't got to be an Alex Hormozy or Gary Vaynerchuk and be on 20 platforms 20 times an hour. You don't have to do that, but you do have to be present. There are other ways around it, of course. You can just spend millions on Facebook ads and Google ads and things like that and drive traffic that way. But it seems to me that there's such an opportunity these days with the social media platforms. LinkedIn is our big one, but there's also YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all the other things as well, that we've got these platforms available now, so we can leverage those. Why would you not? I don't understand people who say, well, it doesn't work for me. If you persist with it, if you do 2 or 3 LinkedIn posts and then say, I didn't get any leads, doesn't work for my business.
Yeah.
Works for so many businesses if you keep pushing, and keep being present and keep adding value. I'm a big fan. I don't know if you know James Smith. He was a sort of a fitness influencer.
Yeah, I do. The fitness guy. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I think he's moved into more business and other. He's got so many skills now with traffic and YouTube and video recording and podcast recording. I'm a big fan of what he's done. But I remember him saying that he was a PT and he would walk the floor every day getting clients. But every day he would do a Facebook Live, sometimes to, 10 or 20 people. But for 3 years he did that without making any money.
Yeah.
He knew that over time that would pay off, and he never stopped doing it. He paid the bills by turning up every day on the gym floor and chatting to people, and some of those people will become personal training clients of his. But you have to have that tenacity, don't you, in business? You don't just start it and overnight it takes off. It really takes momentum to get that ball rolling. And once you do that, you can leverage other things. You've got budgets to, that you can put into other channels, other platforms. But at first, you've just got to do everything possible to get people to know about you.
Yeah, I think Alex Hormozy has a really good example of this. One of his books, I think it's 100 Million Leads. But he says you've got 2 guys or girls, 2 people. They're both given a dice. They're both told they've got a dice, but you don't know how many sides you've got. You don't know how many faces there are on the dice. One might have 20 faces, one might have 8 faces. Okay. And each face of the dice has got 1 dot on it that's red, but there's 1 green dot. And every time you roll the dice, it lands on the green dot. One of the other faces becomes green. Okay. And you keep doing this. You keep doing this until all of the faces are green. At that point, you've got success in your business. This is the analogy that they're using. But the point is that if unknowingly you've got the 8-sided dice, theoretically, you've got a 1 in 8 chance of getting it, and therefore your business will grow very quickly. If you've got the 20 dice, you could be rolling forever because you've got a 1 in 20 chance of getting it before you hit that green dot. The point is the person with the 20 face dice, if they keep doing it and they just keep doing it, like James Smith in the gym doing it for 3 years and not getting a hit, eventually one of the other faces will turn to green. And now you've got 2 chances. And now you've got a 1 in 10 chance of getting it again. And you keep going it again. And then it's a 3 in 10 chance. then it's a 4 in 10 chance, then it's a 50-50. And before you know it, you've got more green side of the dice than you have of everything, and you can't stop making money. Or at least that's what we all hope. But that really resonated with me, of just keep going. Just keep going. And as long as you've got a good idea and, you've got to have a sensible approach, you've got to do your legwork. You've got to do your cash flow forecasts. You've got to do your profit and loss. And you've got to be true to yourself as well. One thing I'm very guilty of is, look at all this money we've got in the bank. We've made this so much money. And you go, hang on a second, wind back. How much does it cost you to get that amount of money? How much have you, and how long is that going to last for? That's the other key thing. We're in an industry where we don't get regular, we get it's quite chunky. So we're in an industry, so it's great we've got money in the bank at the moment, but look at your pipeline. We haven't got anything coming in for the next 4 months. So you've got to chuck that into 4 in order to, is that going to pay the bills for the next 4 months until the next lot of pipeline lands? So I think that's a really key point, is make sure that you're honest with yourself as well, and be realistic, be brutal. I don't think you have to be pessimistic about your pipeline, but just be honest with yourself.
Now, let's go into a bit more detail about your particular industry as well. You help home buyers effectively buy their house, their residential house in the UK. We're in sort of some challenging economic times out there. Is there anything particular in the property industry that frustrates you, that is like a ball and chain around the industry's, the economy's ankle, that you would say, right, if it was down to me and I was in government and I was a housing minister, for example, this is what I changed to try and free the market up, to get the flow and get the whole process more efficient?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. We could be here a long time on this one, Steph. It's a 2-part answer. So the first answer to the question is that the housing supply can be easily dealt with. Developers to build new houses. There are so many hidden costs and handcuffs. And I think that the perception of developers in general is that they're all multimillionaires driving around in their Ferraris. And local government puts so many handcuffs on developers because it's a very clever method of advertising to the world that they are promoting new growth in house building. But the reality of it is they're just taxing everybody to death. Very, very quickly, because I don't want to bore you with anything too political, but most local government have got a 10-unit policy, meaning that if a developer builds more than 10 houses, they have to give a percentage of the houses back to affordable housing. So far, so good. Everybody agrees with that. We need affordable housing for people that can't afford it. Brilliant. The rule in most instances is that if a developer builds 10 houses, they can keep that. They can keep those houses to sell at the full profit and make as much money as they possibly can. But if they sell the 11th one, they've got to give 40% of the houses that they've built back to local government for affordable housing. Meaning, and that's rounded up as well, meaning that if you build 10 houses, you don't have to build any social housing. But if you build 11, you've got to give 5, you've got to give 5 back to social. So the government and local government can profess, oh, we're doing everything we can to get social housing. Look, we've put these restrictions on these big developers to build it, but they don't do it. They just say, well, I'm not going to build 11 houses then. I'm going to build 10 and let somebody else take it on. So that's one thing. And that's curtailing property supply, because they're trying to keep the house prices as high as possible. Because as soon as you supply the demand, house prices will drop. And the British economy is held up largely on the housing market. So that's one thing. But the next thing, and the most important thing, is stamp duty. Now, I get that we need taxes, but stamp duty and the way that it's paid at the moment is absolutely insane. And most people struggle to get the stamp duty money together in order to buy a house, let alone the deposit that they need to put down on a house in order to get a mortgage, with mortgage rates rising anyway. How much more sense would it make for the payment of the stamp duty to be the responsibility of the seller? Because if the seller had to take on responsibility of the stamp duty, then first of all, most sellers won't mind, because they're not paying the stamp duty on their more expensive house they're about to move into. They're paying it on the one they've got rid of, which in most cases has already got equity in it. So you buy a house for 400,000, you live in it for 5 years, and when you come to sell it, it's worth 500,000. So you've now got 100,000 equity into it. That's when you should pay the stamp duty. Not at the beginning when you're struggling to pay a £400 grand mortgage. You should pay it once you've got 100 grand's worth of equity in it. That would speed up the property market because so many first-time buyers out there wouldn't have to find tens of thousands of pounds in order to put down a stamp duty, or second-time owners, tens of thousands of pounds of stamp duty. It will be paid for out of the equity of the houses that's naturally grown over the time that people have lived in the property. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're the thing. I mean, they've just come off the top of my head. I'm sure that there's a whole host of other things. And I'm sure that if there are any other property professionals looking at this, they'll be screaming at screen now and going, oh, what about mortgage rates? Or what about income levels or something like that? And there'll be a whole host of things. Another really good thing that could speed up the property market, again, is if the sellers if the sellers of properties were responsible for the survey and the legal pack, like in Scotland, you could go and view a house and be aware of everything that is the problem with the house, offer then and get the deal done quickly because your solicitors could have a look at it ahead of time. It's a great idea. It would speed the property market up, but it's not a brilliant idea for Barton because it would kind of curtail our business. We've got a space because of the broken system at the moment, to be honest with you.
So that kind of answers the question, but if you had a hotline now to the industry, so to speak, and that obviously involves solicitors, estate agents, developers, vendors and buyers. If you had a hotline to those people, you had a captive audience and you could say, look, we'd all work much better if we did this. Is there something that you'd say, this is how we could improve the whole process for everybody? That's a big question, I know.
That is a big question. You've put me on the spot there, really.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head. Education is certainly part of that. Understanding the role of estate agents, what they are there for.
Yeah.
Understanding how the process works is a huge part of it. Solicitors moving with the times and using technology to speed up the process as far as the conveyancing process is concerned. And certainly local government with searches and things like that being more efficient and more reporting back on the searches, which is a requirement that solicitors need to do in order to go through that conveyancing process. So I guess the answer to that is I wish there was a silver bullet that you could say, do this and it will fix everything. But I think the answer is it's a little bit of everything. The stamp duty, the education, the communication between solicitors moving with modern times and using modern technology. I mean, there are still plenty of solicitors out there that won't use a digital signature. It has to be a wet signature. I mean, like, wake up. We're in a time now where it's like you can do bank transfers, big bank transfers with digital signatures. Yep. Doing a property conveyancing should be the same. And then local government getting searches done. I don't understand enough about that process because I've never done searches, but it has to be quicker than the way it is at the moment. And if we can speed up the process, the property market will be better for all, because there is a saying within the industry, and that is time kills deals. The longer that something goes on for, the more likely it is to fall out of bed. And if we can improve that process for everyone, I think it would just be less stressful, less expensive, and more exciting for everybody involved.
Lead on to that. Is there someone or a business in your industry, that could be any part of the industry, that you've had an eye on for a while? You think these guys are doing well? It could be their branding, it could be their social media, it could be their reputation, it could be their communication. Is there something?
It's doing it well, did you say?
It's weird that you go, these guys are a good business. These guys are a standout. I can see, and I keep an eye on them because you could be solicitors, estate agents, developers. Is there a business that you could give a shout out to and say, I like what these guys are doing, whatever it is in their business?
No.
Fair enough.
Not really, to be honest with you. I don't know of anyone. I know loads of good estate agents. I know some really good developers, some really nice guys that are doing a job really, really well. But as far as somebody that I think stands out and is breaking the industry, as far as making life better for everyone, I'll let you know.
So in that case, then, do you think it's opportunity for just someone to disrupt the industry and come in and change things, or do you think the status quo is pretty much, it is what it is and it's not going to change for the time being?
Well, that's what we're here for, to be honest with you. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to just chop it up a little bit. I think that if estate agents knew, and most estate agents can probably figure out what I do as far as helping the buyers purchase. I think that on the outside of the industry, estate agents, especially people that are not estate agents, could assume that we are the anti-estate agent and we're fighting against estate agents. Whereas experienced estate agents will know that what we are doing is packaging the buyer realistically. We are telling them not to worry about this, don't worry about this. it is fair enough to focus this. We had a message recently from a mortgage broker network that they said that they weren't sure about what we did because they thought that gazundering was unethical. And I went back to them and said, listen, gazundering, for those that don't know, are people that pull the rug out of the deal at the last minute, and they use the pressures in the chain to say, I want money off. If you don't do this, I'm pulling out of the deal very last minute. That's what gazundering is in the most part. And so the mortgage broker in question was saying about Barton Hawk that, the ethics of this, of gazundering and stuff like that. I said, whoa. That's not what we do. We don't gazunder. We're not just pulling money for the sake of it. We're assessing the situation. We're looking at a property. We're making sure that look, when you go and see a property, you go and see it, you love the look of it, you make an offer on it. You then get surveys done, legals done, searches done to discover it is what you think it is that you're buying. And if it is, then I'd advise you to carry on at the asking price. Rarely it is, though. There are often issues that come up that need to have sensible conversations about it. And that is a process-driven communication from the start throughout the transaction to the estate agent and the vendor, explaining, look, we didn't know that there was damp in the kitchen. We didn't know there was a hole in the roof, and we didn't know that the garden fence was broken. This is going to cost us a certain amount of money. Let's have a conversation about that throughout the transaction and come to a fair price to agree on for that work. We're not going to take all of it on. You shouldn't take all of it on. That's what we do. So as far as what we at Barton Hawk do, we are packaging the buyer to say, you don't really need to worry about this. Let's not kick up a fuss by the fact that they've painted the front door pink. We can paint that again. Let's have a conversation by the fact that there are cracks in the foundation that need to be investigated, because if it turns out that there's subsidence there, then we need to have a conversation about it. And so we are a comforting ear to buyers that if estate agents could see what we're doing behind the scenes, I'm confident that in most cases they go, yeah, fair enough. Thank goodness that they're having a sensible conversation about this and they're moving forward, because we want a decent result for everyone. So in that sense, we are trying to be disrupting the industry. I don't know of anybody else that's doing anything like that at the moment. If there are, I'll keep you posted for the next time we chat.
Perfect. Well, you've answered about 4 questions in one great answer there. So
good.
Appreciate
okay,
that.
Excellent. Good.
So I'm just going to move on to a bit more personal now about how running a business has maybe changed you, and has it highlighted to you, I need to improve here, or actually, I can see my strengths here, I need to bring the team up, to speed with these other things. Has it highlighted you to yourself about your own abilities and your desires in terms of, I love doing this, don't really like doing this stuff? Has it raised that for you?
I think one of the really important things to know for any business person, any entrepreneur, is to be very honest with yourself about your weaknesses. And if you're very honest with yourself about your weaknesses and you can plan for that, you're in a really good stead. So my attention to detail, I know that my attention to detail is not brilliant. Okay. Especially when it comes to admin and stuff like that. So we've got Riza, who is my admin assistant. She is absolutely fantastic. And so she covers that for me and I've got that covered. I'm very good at other areas, especially when it comes to property specific stuff and the strategy of running the business. But if I spot a weakness for myself, it's, well, who can I put in place to run that part of the business for me, who I know could do a better job than me? And I think that there's a temptation for a lot of business owners to say, well, I know how to do everything. I can do everything, so I'll save money doing this. In my last role, when I owned the estate agency, I would draw the floor. I was a business owner and I'd draw the floor plans for the property details. That's nuts. That was a really bad business decision, that we've got one of the directors drawing floor plans for properties because you think, well, I know how to do that. I can draw them really, really well, but I can employ somebody to do that. My time's better spent elsewhere. And so I learned that lesson the hard way. And so now I'm very critical of what I can do and what I want to do as well. There is stuff that maybe I should be doing, but if I'm not going to get to it because I really don't like doing it, then I've got to be honest with myself about that as well and say, well, am I going to make myself do it? And if I am going to make myself do it, am I going to be consistent of that? Or do I need to bring somebody in that's going to hold me accountable? And can I afford to do it? And if I can't afford to do it, then I need to pull my bootstraps up and make sure I do it until I can.
I like that. Good answer. Is there someone that or maybe it's someone like Hormozy and people like that, is there someone that you look up to and is like a role model for you in business? Or is there multiple people, or is it just drawing on from your experiences?
I've got lots of role models, but no one individual. My dad is probably my biggest role model. So a huge proportion of that role model that I would look to would be my dad. But then I've got great uncles who I look up to as well, who are very successful in business. My grandfather was a very successful businessman, look up to him. But also certainly with my grandfather, there were elements that I wasn't, I mean, I loved him to bits and very, very close to him. He's no longer with us. But there are other elements that you have to, you take out. So there's a huge proportion of what he said and did to me that I've got a huge amount of respect for. But then there are other elements that maybe weren't so politically correct, shall we say it that way, that I can choose to ignore. He was almost there. So my grandfather ran a business, a state agency business, one of the biggest in the country, or owned, I don't know why I'm not saying his name, Bairstow Eaves. So my grandfather was John Bairstow of Bairstow Eaves, which is a huge estate agency across the country. And I remember him saying to me, my business partner, when I had my business partner was a woman, Louise. And so we ran the business together. This was very alien to him. Describing me having my own estate agency with my business partner, who is a woman, was very alien to him. And he said that he was very much of a mindset that there are men's jobs and women's jobs, and kind of like a estate agency was a man's job. And, women should stay and look after the home. That, he's a product of the era that he grew up in. So obviously I was able to subtract that part of him from my role model and realize that was, stuck in the dark ages. But then there are other aspects where he was, very brave, very bold and forward thinking as far as the business is concerned. So in answer to your questions, with the exception of my dad, who I take in his entirety, but then there are other role models that I take elements of, including, friends of mine and people that I've worked for, and Alex Hormozy and people that I've read about. And so an amalgamation of lots of people is a direct answer to your question.
Excellent. So that leads on to a bit of a deep question. When this chapter of Barton Hawk, whatever it comes to in 5 years, 10 years, whatever it happens for you, how do you want to be remembered? Not
that is
saying you're dead, but I'm just saying, right, a period of time, someone works for you the next 5 years and then they go their separate ways. In 10 years' time, and think, yeah, I'll work for Ollie. How do you want them to think of you?
So Steve is my business partner at the moment, and we were joking about this yesterday. And I said to him that at some point in our future, I'll have a decision to make. And one of those decisions will be, if we go down this route, we will make millions. But if we go down this route, it'll be a lot funnier. And I know that there'll be a moment where I go, yeah, but this is going to be so funny. We should go down this route. So I think I'd like to be remembered as somebody that just had fun and had a bit of a giggle at work whilst building something that was quite successful.
I love that, because, goes back to what we we're talking about at the start, really, where it depends on what your goals are. If you say, right, it's only about the money, it's only about scale relentlessly for the next 10 years, 20 years, that could build a business that makes you extremely wealthy, but bloody miserable from a business perspective. And it's that fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, Ollie, look, it's been really fantastic talking to you. We've been talking for about an hour or so now. And
it's flown by. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolute gold in there. So one final question. If there's something that people can watch this and take away from it, what would you be?
I'd like to come up with something quite profound. And, I think anybody in this situation, when they're asked that question, the stereotypical answer is just do it. Just get out there and do it, which is very easy to say if you've got the opportunity to do that. I guess what I'd say to take away from this is do it when you can, because life is hard, and don't put pressures on yourself to do something ahead of time because you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. As I said earlier on in this podcast, I'm very fortunate in that I've had an idyllic upbringing, and I'm able to do this due to support of my wife, my parents, and that, I'm a product of my environment. But it might be when you're 50 or 60 for some people, when you get to that stage, it might be that you're very fortunate you can do it when you're 20, but definitely give it a go, but don't feel pressured into doing it until you're ready.
Perfect answer. Ollie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. And all the show notes will have all your details of your website. If you want to find out more about Barton Hawk and you, and they'll better connect with you on there. So I really appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks, mate.
Brilliant. Thanks.